The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a new production of Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass, and this week we're going to have a weekly discussion as we do every week. In this case, it's going to be about public issues facing our viewing area. And this week we'll look at how one facet of agriculture is changing, and that's the facet of agriculture known as the grain trade. There are lots of changes you can see in the grain trade just by crossing the railroad track in a small town. And that is that grain elevators are being forced by the market to do larger and larger facilities all the time to simply load grain onto trains. Here with the story is Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser.
Westcon Consolidated Co-op underwent construction and expansion at their Appleton, Minnesota location earlier this year in efforts to meet the needs of their farming partners. The business had a few main reasons for these changes, the first being market conditions.
Market conditions have changed. Iowa used to feed a lot of domestic corn to the south and to the southwest. And with Iowa overbuilding in the ethanol business, they are a corn deficit state, which makes the UP, which we can load cars in Appleton, much more advantage to run through the UP down through Iowa. And the corn that used to be sold domestic market down there is now coming out of Minnesota. And that's what's supporting this project.
Well, in 2013 and 14, rail car demand was very high, and there was a large discrepancy between car availability and prices on multiple railroads. And we just began to investigate what it would take to add additional rail service to this area. First, we had to work with our partner, the TCW, out of Glencoe. We asked if it was possible to bring bigger trains in and work with Union Pacific Railroad.
After studying corn acres and local production, Westcon worked to figure out where all the corn was going and what was left for them to handle. They mapped out similar facilities in their trade area and made their project plan from there.
Well, it's all about options, and right now, as a company, Western Consolidated had access to 2 railroads, and by doing the expansion in Appleton, we have access to 3, and that just multiplies the cars that we have access to.
We are directly tied to the Burlington Northern Railroad right now, which is a very good railroad. We've hung our hat on them. They are the backbone of our company and have kept us very competitive. The last couple of years with the Burlington Northern, with the freight premiums, we have run a lot of grain east that normally we don't. We've run a lot of grain over Chicago and down into the southeast market. So yeah, we have run a lot of grain now. And probably the last couple of years, probably a little more to the ethanol plants than normal, and that's simply a lack of reasonable railroad freight. With the change in market conditions, hooking up to the UP and the Burlington Northern, we can get into every domestic market in the United States.
Our markets become more domestic and ethanol driven, and the UP Railroad and the TCW bring us access to more domestic and ethanol type markets in the South. What it does for our trade is it increases access, which leads to higher prices and more options for our producers. And over the long term, it reduces Westcon's exposure to one railroad.
It also opens up 36 destinations in Mexico. On the average, we feel it'll be worth 2 to 3 cents on every bushel that runs through the company on an annual basis.
Westcon Expansion Project is a 2-year process from start to finish. It is a substantial investment at $19.5 million. In the last 2 years, Westcon has paid off more than $6 million worth of debt. The project added 40,000 bushels of dumping capacity, 7,000 bushels per hour of drying capacity, and additional storage.
The Appleton is frankly too close to the Holloway facility, but it does give us the opportunity of a whole other market and a whole other railroad. It just takes pressure off of Holloway, so that's the reason we built that over there.
It opens up a lot of trade area to the south and west of Appleton that we're currently not accessing, and we fully expect to participate more in that market now than we have in the past. Because of Appleton's access to other rail lines, there are certain times of the year where we can access markets that other people or other businesses in this area can't, and that helps us grow our member base, it helps us grow our volume, and it should only continue in the future.
South of Appleton, we do expect our membership to increase this first year. As a matter of fact, we've seen it already. So everything we've done in the past, we've been, I think, way ahead of everybody, but the farmers keep expanding, and I think our next expansion is to make sure we keep up with them and that we keep a competitive advantage.
For local farmers like Gary Nygaard, this expansion doesn't impact his income as much as it does his harvest.
The elevator's role is, of course, to be here and be open. They accommodate us during harvest with longer hours and enough personnel that everything goes smoothly. You know, it's not just the grain handling thing. Once the crops are off, we go to the agronomy department, we need soil testing and we need fertilizer. And then in the spring, of course, you need seed, and it's kind of a complete package. The new technology with weighing in, weighing out, and the new storage is really going to be good for the area. It's going to help us through harvest because of expanded storage and this new facility at Terminal A, the state-of-the-art technology. It gets you in and out quickly. You know, the sooner we can get back to the field and get the next load, it's better for us.
For smaller elevators, farmers with their own drying systems stand as competition to their business. Westcon works hand-in-hand with these farmers, Nygaard included.
Corn, of course, most of the time is going to require some drying. I do have a drying system on my farm, but then if I'm north of Appleton harvesting, there's just a few points of moisture to take out, and I've got it forward contracted. I will more than likely not drive by their facility to haul it home to store it. I'll haul it here and let them dry it for me, and there's no downside for us. And when the elevator does well, the patrons get to share in it, whereas a private-owned elevator, you don't get that.
With us now to talk about these changes are two guests that we have who know the grain trade very well. We have from Westcon Cooperative in western Minnesota, we have Dean Isaacson, who's the general manager for Westcon, and Westcon operates in western Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, and also with us is Bob Zelenka, and Bob is the executive director for the Minnesota Grain and Feed Association. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on Compass.
Thank you.
Dean, I'd like to start with you. I know we've talked in the past, just informally, about the grain trade and all the changes. So what does it really mean for you and for Westcon having to do all these changes? This seems like an awful lot to do.
Yeah, it's the producers have advanced. They've gotten so efficient, large machinery. The markets have changed, the railroads have changed, the river has changed, and so we're trying to keep up with the domestic market, the export market, trying to keep up with the producer and still build, quick, fast, efficient facilities. And the other issue we have is hiring really good employees to come out and run these facilities. So it's just a huge change in the last 15 years.
When you talk about, I want to pick up on that. You talk about the idea of hiring more people all the time. Obviously we've seen a lot of automation, a lot of other things, but is the people part of this still really, really critical? That you need a lot of really skilled people to run these facilities? Yeah,
actually today more than ever, our equipment today, everything's automated. Everything's run by computers, so it takes an awful, not only working hard, it's about really working smart today. So our people need a whole lot more training, and even we look for a lot more education instead of just hiring a normal person. So jobs are more specific. When I first started, you probably worked fertilizer, you probably worked grain, you probably drove truck. Nowadays we have an agronomy manager, we have a feed manager, we have merchandisers, grain merchandisers, we have grain origination people. So yeah, it's much more job specific, and we need very, very talented people, once again, to keep up to very, very talented producers.
Yeah, of course, because there's a sophistication throughout all of it. Now, I know, Bob, of course, you're from your perspective with the Grain and Feed Association, you're seeing these kinds of things all over the state of Minnesota and working with colleagues throughout the country. So put some sort of context in, I mean, is this something you're seeing all over, or is it just in pockets, or how is this really going on in the business?
Well, it's happening nationwide. In Minnesota, we've seen over the last probably 20 years a real growth in the large facilities, as one like Dean runs. There's probably 150 rail users in the state, and 50 of those now are those large unit train loading facilities where you can load 110, 112 cars in less than 15 hours. You're going from one origin to one destination. It's all about efficiency. I think railroads sort of came across with that idea back in about 1979, 1980, and it's really taken hold for various reasons. Railroads are interested in efficiency. Economics has kind of led to some mergers, consolidations, but I think just getting the best rates and best service is probably the biggest incentive that I think a lot of these guys have taken advantage of.
One of the things I'm wondering about is if you could quantify sort of the changes. I know you talked about the fact that years ago it was very different just when the employees, and of course you talked about how it's changed over the years. 110 unit trains now. I mean, if we were to go back to when a lot of our viewers maybe grew up on the farm or went to the local elevator, if you went back 30 or 40 years, compare then to now.
Well, back then you were looking at single car rates, or trucking your grain to various markets. There was a lot more livestock locally. So a lot of grain was consumed locally. But today, you're seeing markets are international, domestic as well as international, overseas, Mexico, Canada. And to get at those markets, we really need high efficiency. And that's kind of where I think things have gone. But yeah, looking back in time, things have changed quite a bit. Used to have a grain elevator every 7 to 9 miles. Just I think primarily because that's where the railroad stopped every 9 miles. And there was an elevator. You needed that just with moving things to town by horse, if you will, oxen, then by truck. Farmers have gotten more, their ability to move grain longer distances has really improved. Most of them have semis, and so the whole industry has changed quite a bit, a lot of on-farm storage and so on. So anyway, to find our niche, we've had to kind of go with the times and expand and provide that efficiency everybody needs.
Yeah. I'd like to pick up on what you said about the international trade a minute, because of course we all see grain trucks and we'll see the trains and we'll see them moving, but the idea of where does all of this grain go after it leaves where we are can be kind of a mystery because you don't see that part of it. So how has that part changed over the years?
Well, I think the international market has really grown. You had the Soviet Union being a big market back in the 70s and so on, and it's just continued to grow since then. The market development has been into Asia, I think more so than anything. We used to have markets in Europe and so on, but those markets have changed. Then you got new players in the game as well, with Brazil, Argentina competing with us on the international markets. But a lot of our grain, I know a lot of Dean's grain will go West Coast by rail internationally. Some go into Mexico, I suspect, as well, and into Canada as well. But then we have feed markets in Southwest, Southeast part of the United States. Grain will be moving down there as well. But we need efficient system up here. We're as far away as you can be from any market. So it's important for us to be as efficient as we can. So that's been the challenge.
And then what about, when we talk about transportation, we've talked about rail, but what about, intermodal sorts of things? Because when you see national or local stories about the grain trade, you may hear about barges and ships and all of the other pieces. I mean, what about the broader infrastructure for grain? How does that affect what you do?
Well, water is probably the cheapest way to move grain out of this region. If you're close to the Twin Cities and to the river, barge traffic going to Louisiana, to New Orleans is the best way to move grain, or the cheapest way to move grain. But by having water access, it actually keeps the pressure on the railroads to be reasonable with their rates, because they have that competition where you don't have that in North Dakota, for example. You don't have water, you're just rail sort of captive shipper, if you will. And so that's a real advantage for us, not to overlook the role that the truck plays in all of this, in terms of moving for the short hauls, whether it's to the elevator, to the river, to processing facilities, and so on. The truck plays a key role in this as well.
Well, and of course, the market force is also playing a role. I'm thinking about the fact that in the last few years, there was a lot of attention paid to the changes in the oil, with the oil boom, and now we've got declining oil prices. So what happens with that, I'm sure, can affect what you do as well in terms of just the competition for what's on the rails themselves.
Yeah, we're seeing right now with our trains, we had one coming off the PNW here. Normally it'd take 5-6 days. It's back in 2.5 days. The oil trains are off the tracks, so they're sitting in storage, and the unit trains, the hook and pole ones that go back and forth, there is no stopping them. They just got a straight line. So it's made it much more efficient for the railroads and the service is almost unbelievable. Now they're showing up quicker than we want them. So, which a year ago we would have never said that. So.
Well, and I know that's another thing that for people who are inside the business, I've talked to some people who've been working on these, and they talk about the fact that, you know, you would get a call if you're working for an elevator, and you'd get up in the middle of the night, and then you'd have to go sit somewhere and wait and hope the train would come in. And then when it did come in, it was sort of like a wait and hurry up situation. And now you're saying they're actually starting to show up a little, you know, on time or maybe a little earlier in some cases.
Yeah, and it's still, you know, we got one supposed to be scheduled in today, and it's coming at 10 tonight, so we'll come in and load it all night. But normally that train wouldn't have been here for 2.5 days yet. And a year ago, maybe even 5 days later than what it's supposed to be. So it's there's a lot less traffic on the railroads, and that's pretty much the BNSF. I think pretty much all of them right now with the oil being shut down.
Right. And I would expect this would have really affected your planning too in the business, because if you think about something like the WestCon expansion here, or what many other elevators do, from you start planning that sort of in one economic environment or one period of time, and by the time you actually get it built, things could be very, very different. Have you sort of seen that in the trade?
Yeah, right now is a really good example. Last year, cars were trading at probably $4,000 or $5,000 per car over tariff. Now, what of course the producer selling has slowed up a little bit with the grain prices down. The cars have speeded up, and so today we're seeing cars trade at, here a while ago they were $400 under tariff. So now you got trains bought at 100 or 150 over tariff, and they're showing up at 400 under tariff simply because of the speed. And there's some lack of farmer selling that. But so it's every plan that you had 6 months ago, you can throw it out the window today and start all over pretty much.
But I know in the case of, you know, these facilities, when you walk by them, they're huge, they're well lit, they're impressive when people go by. I'm sure the reaction you get from people going by is, "Wow, isn't it great that, you know, that there's this, you know, great facility here," even though at times it may mean, you know, some other changes in local roads or things.
We, you know, the railroad through the western part of Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, we are the food line to the rest of the world. I mean, we are main line to the P&W. We're fortunate here in Appleton with our facility. We can go to Mexico, we can get to the Gulf, we can get through Chicago over to the eastern markets, we can get into Duluth. So we're real fortunate we can get any place. So.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about the investments that it takes to make that happen, because, I mean, particularly when you're in a member-owned cooperative, those kinds of things, there are a lot of things to manage. You've got members and people and farmers who are bringing in grain and are involved. And what's the reaction from members generally at local elevators or even larger ones about the investments that it takes to make this happen?
Well, from my position, since 2000, we've spent $120 million in our region out here. And we take it to, you know, we have 9 board of directors who are all producers, and of course we got to work with co-banks where we do all our financing. But generally you put it together and it's all about market share, and service is another thing. We need storage. We've got to be able to load trains when we want, not when we have to. So it's a number of things that we make better service. We can get carry in the market. We can be more competitive in the market. So it does a number of things. And my experience is the producers have been very, very accepting of what we're doing and very supportive. Our producers have been very, very supportive. So, and it's needed. You know, even in 2000, a pretty good sized planter was probably a 12-row. Today we got 36-row. You know, so we had to go from a 12-row fertilizer plant to a 36-row fertilizer plant to keep up with them. And the grain facilities are the same thing. So.
Yeah, because it's not just, in your case as a cooperative, it's not just the elevator part where the grain's coming in and it's going out. It's also the other services that farmers are asking for as they go through this.
Great. So, yeah, so it's fertilizer, it's grain drying, it's storage, it's the big picture you got to look at. So, and it isn't really as a co-op or a local co-op what we want. It's what our producers need. And so if we want to service them and keep their business, we have to continuously reinvest. But the investment is huge.
Yeah. Bob, getting back to you for a minute on some of the larger investments, because we're talking about WestCon as an example of what many elevators are doing, but there are other sorts of investments in rural areas that often have to happen as well. For example, transportation. Tell me about the transportation piece of this, because obviously it's one thing to get a train loaded and moving down the tracks. It's another thing to have the infrastructure in place before the grain even gets into the elevator, right?
Right, yeah. A good road network is obviously very important. On the rail side, the railroads have put in a lot of money, particularly the BNSF, since a couple of years ago we had kind of the perfect storm with a lot of oil moving and a lot of issues with weather and so on. But they've spent a lot of money and putting in infrastructure. It's really helped with the efficiency of moving on rail. But yeah, it really starts back to the country. Having good access to the farm. A lot of grain stored on the farm. In fact, in Minnesota, over 75% of the total storage in Minnesota is actually located on the farm. And so there's a lot of grain that is stored on the farm, has to move from the farm. So a good farm-to-market system is something that's been discussed. We've been involved in that issue in the legislature for the last many years. And it's very important to have a good total infrastructure to really move this grain from the farm to the elevator. And it's been coming along. Back in the day, we didn't have 10-ton road access to all communities. I mean, that kind of thing. So that was a good starting point, but now we're on our way. Hopefully, we can look at some other things in the legislature. For example, as I mentioned, truck weights is something that we're looking at, trying to be on par with Canada and our North Dakota neighbors in terms of maybe being able to haul at higher weights. We do have an exemption for raw and on-processed commodities, but we'd like to see that expanded even further.
Well, I know earlier we talked about technology a little bit, and Dean, you talked about the fact that you had people who really need to be well trained, and there's a sophistication of that, and I'm sure you're seeing that all over. Let's talk about technology a little bit. So how is technology really changing the grain trade? Obviously, you said there's a lot more automation. Are there other things that people really might not be aware of when they think of the elevator of years ago, that they walk in and out and say, oh, wow, look at that?
Well, as far as the marketing go, it's instant. The producer calls us up. It used to be we had market TVs in our office were 5-minute, 10-minute, maybe even 15 minutes at one time. Today we have instant quotes. So when it changes in the Chicago Board of Trade, it changes in our office. So we can quote an exact price. If a producer would sell 10,000 bushels to us, we don't even call a broker anymore. We just punch it in our computer and put the hedge on right through the. So there's so much limit, and everything is instant access nowadays. So, and just to start, it just the farmers can, every co-op, every elevator, you can go on the Gulf, you can get the Gulf bid. So, they can really find any bid they want. They can get the same P&W bid I get. So there really are no secrets in the grain anymore. It's you got your bid, so you just got to figure out how you're going to be competitive and how you're going to buy it. But the technology it's there. It's
a far cry from having to call up the local elevator and find out what's going on. And now people will check it on their smartphone. They'll have it right there at their fingertips all the time, right?
Yeah, and our markets every afternoon, we text them out to our producers so they know what our market. They don't have to call us at 3 o'clock if they're sitting in the tractor. We text it to them. And a lot of them have their iPads, of course. They can go on our webpage and get them, So, yeah, the technology's really changed it.
Another thing, when people deliver grain to his facility or all these other shuttle loading facilities or unit train loading facilities, they don't even have to get out of their trucks anymore. It's all done by the card, that they get weighed in, they dump, they leave, and again, you don't even have to get out of your truck anymore. So it's kind of worked out again, it's part of that efficiency thing with these elevators, but it's really come a long way since the old horse and wagon days, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, or even for that, as I recall, the days of bringing in the truck, and if the truck didn't have the hoist, the whole front end of the truck would be lifted up. It was a very different world, and I think for so many people who were, growing up on a farm or farming in those days, the changes now would just be staggering, as you said, not even getting out of your truck.
Right. Yeah, it's really come a long ways.
In the few minutes we have left, I'd like to talk about, just glance into the future a little bit, about the future of the grain trade. I know we said there are so many changes from the time you start to invest in a facility until the facility's built, or so many changes in market forces. I'm going to ask you to just look ahead for a little bit, 2016 and beyond. What are the next things you see in the grain trade?
Well, one of the big things that they're going to keep pushing, of course, we're dealing with all the GMO issues, and that's going to take a little while to get resolved. And food security, Bob brought that up a little earlier, but food security is going to be a big thing. Right now, we're not doing any identification for preserving it, but it'll be there. Markets, $7 corn, we've taught South America how to grow corn, and that shows on our exports right now in the P&W and the Gulf. We're really, really down on corn. Beans, it's going to be a much shorter season. So we got some real world issues. The U.S. dollar, of course, is affecting our market right now. So there's a number of things in 2016 we've got to work through. We've got an awful lot of corn in the United States, with the rest of the world, actually, the inventory's dropped a little bit. So we're going to have some issues this fall on where it's going to go, how we're going to handle it. And as we have to get competitive in the world market right now. So as a producer and us in our world, we've got a lot to deal with in the next 16 months, trying to make all of our budgets balance. So,
well, I don't know, from your facilities, whether it's in your facilities are in Holloway, Minnesota, and in Twin Brook, South Dakota, and many other places. So whether you're there or wherever you are, you're going to have those facilities. Bob, sort of a wrap up here on where we're going.
Well, I think you're going to see, and what we've already seen is a continuation of mergers and consolidations within our industry. When I started 34 years ago, we had 225 local co-ops. Now we're down to 79 local co-op firms, and I think that's going to continue. And it's primarily due to a lot of it is regulatory. Some of these older elevators just can't keep up with the regulations that are coming on us now with food security and other things, OSHA regs and so on. So it's going to be a real challenge, I think, too. But again, we're going to get smaller but larger facilities. Farmers have more mobility, so you don't need, like I mentioned earlier, don't need an elevator every 7 miles. And the problem is going to be employment and finding good employees. It's a challenge right now, and I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for us into the future.
Okay. Great. Good note to end on. Bob Zelenka, Dean Isaacson, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And as we leave you this week, we're going to show you a little bit of another local music production. It's called Grassland Jam. It's a show that we started a couple years ago here on Pioneer Public Television with a look at bluegrass music. So as we leave you now, be sure to join us next week on Compass and enjoy the music.